Welcome to episode 22 of the Living Outside the Matrix podcast from lawfulrebel.com.
Lawful rebel,
Comprehensive goals,
lawful rebel,
active minds, open doors.
lawful rebel,
You can see the signs if you read between the lines.
Hello there, and welcome to the Living Outside the Matrix podcast, where we stimulate thought and try and step outside of the box of all those conventional things that people know. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we are going to look at capitalism. We're going to look at why capitalism is not the root cause of any problems that human beings currently face, and why it's arguably, demonstrably, the solution to many of our problems. It ensures your rights, it ensures your freedom and my rights. It serves our very interests. So allow me to explain why. This whole podcast is motivated by the fact that there's this rising tide of anti-capitalism. There's a rising sense that capitalism, this thing that people label as capitalism, is responsible for a lot of the economic ills that currently face humanity. But I want to try and show you that in fact capitalism is the only socio-economic system that declares man free. And so let's have a little look at freedom, and just to remind ourselves how desirable it is, and let's evaluate whether or not we are free at the moment. So let's kick off with, are we free? Well, some years ago I had an experience which conclusively proved to me that I am not free. Like many people, I wanted to build my own house, and I happened to have inherited some land, so I wanted to live on it and build my house there. I found that the government required me to ask for permission. As most people know, in the UK, this is quite normal. So anyway, I wanted to test the fact that I'd always been told I was free. And so upon hearing about some new technology in what was then called the free man movement, where various thinking people were uncovering the technology and the means through which the state manages to sort of legitimize its claim over men. So the new thinking was that if we explode the way the government is playing smoke and mirrors, we can actually be free. So allow me to explain. The government said that I needed planning permission, and so being familiar with this freeman technology, I did something called a conditional acceptance. So I said to the government, yes, I'm very happy to do whatever's required of me. No question about it, on the condition that you just kindly prove to me that I am actually so obligated. So what this amounts to is questioning jurisdiction. It's questioning, look, it's saying, I'm happy to do what you want, but can you just prove it to me? Let's just check the contract, shall we? You say I owe you 50 grand, let's just check, because if I do, I'm happy to pay. So it's this sort of process. And I went through a lengthy court challenge and a long paperwork exchange, and I got kidnapped by the police a few times. And at the end of the day, the long and short of it is that I found that the state proved by its action, by it not wanting to hear any claim, any question about jurisdiction, the state demonstrated by its actions that it is above me, the man. And there is, some technology, as I say, that around this deception, and it involves essentially men and women volunteering to be surety for a government-created legal entity. But that's another story which we won't get into just here. So people volunteer to be their name in capital letters. And a government, an institution, a pile of paperwork, a concept, an idea that is government can create paperwork entities and it can control them. But can it really have legitimate control over men? So anyway, the long and short of my shenanigans with the free man movement and with the government with respect to the planning issue showed me that I am most definitely not free. I went for the most fundamental issue. Can I live on my own land? Can I use my own property as I see fit? So the answer was, in fact, no, I couldn't. So I know that I'm not free. I've done, obviously we're still free to do a large number of things, but when push comes to the shove, it's like the free-range chickens on the farm, that they're quite happy to roam around, but if they start to try and leave the farm, the farmer draws the line. And it's similar with the state. If we want to step outside of the system, if we wanted to be autonomous, if we wanted to renounce governance and say, look, do you know what, chaps, I'm all right, I'll govern myself. You're not allowed to do that. That is what you're not allowed to do, and that ultimately demonstrates that we're not free. For most people, this isn't a point of concern because they're free enough to do the things that they're concerned with. Their world has shrunk to some extent, and if you can be entertained and distracted into just enjoying your life as it is, then of course you won't bother to want to be really free. So, to recap, we're not free. We're actually not free. And some studying that I've done since shows that the only country that has ever been free, or the only country in which people have been free, was the birth of America in 1776, when it was granted independence from England. And the United States was created with men above government, literally government there to serve men and to protect their rights, but the rights of man were absolutely sacrosanct, and that's the first time in history this has ever happened. And this is why the example of America is so important, and why it's so tragic that a lot of that freedom has been lost and is being further eroded by this anti-capitalism. So, America, the only country ever born in freedom. Why freedom? Why am I banging on about freedom? Who cares? You know, some people don't, as I just alluded to. But the fact remains that it's in humanity's best interests to be free. Everybody knows from introspection that they don't want to be shoved around. They don't want to be told what to do. If I told you to get down and do 50 press-ups, why should I? By what right? Nobody wants their day dictated to. Nobody wants to be told, hey, go and work in that slave labour camp. It's obvious. And we know from the experience of the slave trade that productivity is reduced and human beings don't work well in captivity. We also know from a broader perspective that the human race needs to be free to really move on, to really move forward and keep learning. With the in the past, where everybody thought the world was flat, and then we thought that the sun revolved around the earth and all this sort of stuff, the people that dared to question that were persecuted because there wasn't an environment of freedom. There was an environment of vested interests in the church at the time that said, no, we mustn't go there. And so we can see that freedom is absolutely essential. And there are certain prerequisites for freedom. Freedom requires that we be free from interference, free from coercion, from any kind of force, from any kind of being made to do what we don't want to do. We have to be free from any kind of authority and any obligation to be obedient. So we've got freedom from, but then we've also got freedom to, and to a certain extent, obviously, they're interlinked. Freedom to think and to choose, to judge, and then to act upon that judgment. So capitalism is the only socio-economic system that says that man is free. capitalism recognizes, that man owns his own life, that he lives for his own sake, that he owns his body and the results of his actions, and therefore his production. It's about property rights. It's about nobody taking your stuff away from you with any kind of claim. So in this respect, capitalism very much supports freedom. Capitalism is also it's against aggression. It's against any kind of force and coercion. So it's against slavery. It stands against war. The moral principles of capitalism are really rather impeccable if we stop to think about what it is. What are these implications? Capitalism, as I said, is the social expression of the recognition of the rights of individual men. This equates to being able to own property and keep all your stuff and trade, and therefore have an incentive to trade. And it involves being free to think, no censorship. It involves the discouraging of war, and it involves obviously the abolition of slavery. Now, since slavery, quick tangent, was abolished in the 19th century throughout the whole world, there has been slave labour in the 20th century in the slave labour camps of the Soviet Union and various other leftist organisations, Nazi slave labour camps. So capitalism protects freedom. It's also a key factor in wealth generation. Now, everybody likes wealth. We don't want to be hunter-gatherers. We don't want to be carving symbols on cave walls. We want to be modern man enjoying technology, enjoying computers, cars, washing machines, houses, everything that we use today. We want to enjoy these things, and this is wealth. Wealth is material possessions more than it is a pile of money. Yes, money is a component of wealth, and because we use money as a tool to exchange different values and to be able to accumulate an amount of value to exchange for a higher value, so we can accumulate wealth in the form of money. But wealth is not just money. It's not just numbers on your bank account, because as the North American Indians said, you can't eat money. So wealth is stuff, it's produce, it's material things. So capitalism just happens to be the best way to produce wealth. Because it respects property rights, it allows people to own the effects of what they do and their thinking and their planning and their making. It doesn't say, capitalism doesn't say, well, you can keep 80% of your stuff, 90%. It doesn't say you can keep 50% of your stuff. It says it's all yours. This is a really big distinction, because taking all of someone's stuff is slavery. 100% taxation is slavery. 50% taxation, is that freedom? Capitalism says you get to keep all of your stuff. This is really important. And it therefore provides an incentive to trade. It also means that there's no force or coercion. It's opposed to war. During the century where capitalism sprang into existence but was immediately sort of diluted and forever, its essence has diminished from its inception, if you like. It's been continually watered down with various government regulations and then bringing in of central banks and so forth. But in its heyday, capitalism provided us with 100 years of peace, 100 years of international peace from 1812 to 1914. An amazing achievement. That was capitalism. Everybody was too busy trading and making money. Capitalism also, as I said, got rid of slavery. So it's a very moral system. We'll get back to summarising the morality of it. Capitalism then is the way to produce wealth, and few people argue against that, really, because if you really do your homework, there isn't an argument against the fact that the freer a country's is economically, the more economic freedom the people have. This is directly proportional to the amount of wealth generated and the consequent standard of living of everyone in the country. So we know we want wealth, but wealth generation is not capitalism's main credential. The reason we must stand for capitalism, the reason we must defend capitalism, and the reason we must try and persuade any unthinking people who are anti-capitalists is that capitalism is moral. It's the only moral system. Of all the variations of statism, which grant you a percentage of your freedom, capitalism is the only system that declares man free. It is entirely upon moral grounds that we defend capitalism. So let's venture a definition of capitalism before going on to summarize its moral credentials. Capitalism is a socio-economic system based on the recognition of property rights in which all property is privately owned, including, of course, the means of production, and in which men freely exchange goods and services unregulated by any governmental, that means coercive, intervention. So in other words, there are no barriers to trade. You get to keep all of your stuff. There's nothing stopping you or I from plying our trade, as it were. So capitalism is the name, you could say, for the conditions required by production and trade. It's the recognition of property rights and the banning of force. So capitalism is moral. This is the main defense and the main point that I would like to get through to anybody that cares about being free and about man progressing into greater knowledge, greater wisdom, greater awareness, peace. Peace can only be achieved when we can finally walk away from the need to aggress against each other. And this is why rationality, reason and capitalism are so important, because they recognize and they give enormous value to non-aggression. Another thing we all know by introspection. So capitalism, just to summarize its moral credentials, capitalism upholds the individual rights of men, because the only way to breach someone's rights is by initiating force, basically. It is the action of coercing a man to act against his own judgment. That's what force is. And we use force and violence where, if I put a gun at you and say, give me your wallet, I'm forcing you to act against your best judgment, which is to keep my wallet, of course. So it's ultimately against the mind that any force and violence is aimed. It forces people to be anti-rational. People want to rationally look after themselves. Violence is anti-rational. It's the most profoundly anti-life thing, is violence and force. So the banishing of the use of force, except of course in self-defense, is central to morality and central to capitalism. Capitalism is the only system inherently opposed to slavery, as we mentioned earlier, because it's against the initiation of the use of force, and as mentioned, it proved that a slave economy cannot compete with a free market economy. And capitalism, as we know, also stands against war. So we've got, you could also add to that capitalism's guiding principle is justice. I think that's probably a very important one to throw in there. Because it stands against theft, and it rewards the producer, the thinker, the person that creates, running a business, producing products. Capitalism rewards the doer, the thinker, the rational person, and it's in that we see its guiding principle of justice. That is the essence of justice. So if it is peace, freedom and abundance that we want, and I want that, and I'm sure you want that too, I'm sure everybody wants peace, freedom and abundance, we have to realize that the way to that is capitalism. Capitalism represents peace, freedom and abundance. Now, this is not to say that there aren't an awful lot of economic problems, social problems that exist in the world today. And the problem is that capitalism is being used as something of a scapegoat. There are many problems, for example, when we manipulate the money supply. We have a central bank and a fractional reserve banking system with the central bank in control, and a fiat currency. That's a currency that is just declared by the government to be the main currency. So we have complete control. We don't have a free market in currencies, which, I mean, some people can't even get their head around a free market in currency because we're so used to having one imposed on us. But capitalism would advocate a free market in money as well as in goods. And that has existed in the past, and it's worked quite well. It was in its infancy, and of course many currencies compete, just the same with Bitcoin today and all the cryptocurrencies that are arising. There are many that start off, and the best one wins. And this process happened in America before the central bank was imposed on them. So anyway, to come back on point, the mixed economy with its manipulation of the money supply is really to blame for the economic problems that we have today. Let me briefly explain the mixed economy. It has some semblance of capitalism. Obviously, we have some ability to free trade. We have some property rights because you have to have some semblance of a free market for trade to happen. Remember that trade, of course, on its own is not capitalism. Trade can happen between any thugs or thieves, and it's not necessarily capitalism. Trade is just the exchange of goods. So, where were we? The mixed economy has some elements of a capitalist system, a relatively free market, although that's always being encroached upon. But the mixed economy also has, as I said, the central bank and the fiat currency with the fractional reserve banking system. And the central bank, remember, is one of the 10 pillars of the Communist Manifesto. So this interference with the money supply is one key factor. But another one is the tag team that occurs between big business and the state. So there's a bully boy in the room, if you like, and there's someone with loads of money. The bully boy is the state, because the state is the only institution that has a monopoly on the initiation of the use of force. So bring in the rich person that needs to get something done. They can buy influence, and they call it lobbying these days, but it's just corruption and bribery, essentially. Lobbying occurs all the time, and it is industries trying to get government to make regulations that are favourable to their particular industry. So you get this tag team between government and big business, which creates all sorts of problems. But that is not capitalism. That is not capitalism. This must be understood. On top of that, government regulation with its subsidies, whole industries get subsidized. The whole playing field gets skewiffed. Justice is destroyed. Subsidies, tariffs, special government franchises. People get upset about the idea of a monopoly, a coercive monopoly to be precise, and it can't happen on an open market. There's no way with a free open market to prevent anybody competing. It's the absolute, the non-possibility of competition is what a coercive monopoly is. as opposed to a beneficial monopoly or an ordinary monopoly. Like, for example, supposing all the Samsung phones and all the other Androids go out of business and everybody goes for Apple because it's so good. The iPhone is just so brilliant. Everybody uses it. Well, that would be a monopoly, but it wouldn't be one that anyone complains about. So coercive monopoly is a problem, and the only way you can get a coercive monopoly is through law. It is by legislation, an act of government. So it's the bully boy in the room teaming up with the person that can buy the influence. And this is nothing to do with capitalism. It's a huge causer of problems, but it is not capitalism. So in a future episode and indeed blog post, we'll go into more of the specific things that are problems that are laid at the feet of capitalism. We're going to look at more of the specifics that capitalism is blamed for. But the most important thing I wanted to say here is that it's the mixed economy, it's the elements of statism that creep in that are the real source of the problem. And capitalism is completely moral. It generates wealth. It gives us our freedom and respects our property rights. It's the socio-economic system of justice. We must educate ourselves. And one final point in conclusion is that a lot of the people who would knock capitalism, a lot of the chorus of anti-capitalists, if you listen out for the solutions, if you think, well, okay, there's something wrong with capitalism, what do you propose to do about it? You will always find that the solution is going to involve less freedom. It's going to involve more regulation. It's going to involve less freedom. And this is part of the slippery slope in which it has been proved that regulation, statist intervention, always goes down a slippery slope into ever-increasing regulation. It can be mathematically shown. If, for example, you control the price of milk because you want everybody to enjoy milk, and you fix the price of milk, you then find that marginal milk producers go out of business. So actually, in fact, there's less milk available. So then you have to start regulating and fixing the prices of the industries that supply milk. And you could go on with this, and you can see that regulation breeds regulation. So the danger in the solutions is that they are more and more statist. They're more and more loss of freedom. So this is the real tragedy of anti-capitalists, or indeed ordinary well-meaning people, hearing anti-capitalist slogans and hearing that, oh, that's to blame for that, and without really thinking it through, without really delving and stepping outside this matrix of mind control, unless we do that, unless we really think for ourselves, it's easy to absorb these ideas around us and join in on the chorus, which is actually calling for our slavery. So I hope you got some benefit from this. If you give us a thumbs up and a like on the video, and visit the website lawfulrebel.com for more information on how you can step outside the matrix yourself, how you can increase your knowledge and question a lot of the assumptions. That's the key. It's not just increasing knowledge, it's actually identifying false assumptions.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.